Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. As the welcome slide said, I'm Charlotte Miller, and I will be attempting to lead or moderate this discussion today. And let me first introduce a couple of our panelists, Nav Dhaliwal. I always try to say it not quite right, who is on the U Alumni Board of Governors and the Chief Financial Officer at Schlatt Health. And also Jacob Parkin, who is a recent graduate of the David Eccles School of Business and will soon be completing his Master's in Information Systems. I'm also extremely honored to have with us a distinguished author today, Diane Musho Hamilton. Google her. You'll see lots of good works by her that I won't enumerate right now, but what I can tell you about her personally is that I have watched her work inside organizations with leaders and employees to guide them through transformation and to provide a framework for communication that leads to an important culture shift, to an improved culture. The idea for this particular session is that you hear a lot of leaders today talk about their organization's culture and looking for employees who can help grow the culture. Workplaces say they're looking for people who are problem solvers, communicators, and team-oriented folks. These skill sets are really difficult to identify sometimes when you're interviewing. They're also difficult to display when you're in an interview setting. Diane Musho Hamilton has written 2 books about these attributes and has helped many navigate, as I said, through complex problems that involve communication and building culture. The books are Everything is Workable and Compassionate Conversations. I've listened to them and also had hard copies. To give you a sense of the books, I wanted to tell you some of the chapter headings to set the tone for what we're going to be talking about. And at one organization, I actually had a team all read Everything is Workable every week, a different chapter, and then practice what the chapter taught us. And some of those chapters are attention and awareness, speak for yourself, negotiation, conflict and creativity, 2 words that people often think don't go together, giving and receiving feedback, great rivalry, great intimacy. And in Compassionate Conversations, one of the sentences that I think is important for all of us to take with us is this: conversation is and will remain one of the most tried and true methods of bringing people together. And so with that introduction and with the thought about people looking for jobs, starting in jobs, and us spending so much time in the workplace, how we apply those ideas to where we work, I want to start by just asking Diane to share with us what inspired you or what was the triggering event that led you to writing these books. And Diane, I think you're muted.
About that. Thank you, Charlotte, for such a gracious introduction. Charlotte and I met when I was the director of alternative dispute resolution in the court system, and Charlotte was the president of the Utah State Bar. And it gave us a couple of really nice opportunities to work together. And then as she moved out into the business world and was working in HR in a number of different organizations, we were able to collaborate on some really, really wonderful initiatives and also some real problem solving, working with employees, helping employees work through difficulties with each other. So I just want to appreciate Charlotte for all the work she does on behalf of people generally. And I'm really happy to be here. I'm a Utah alumni, so how about that? I have a degree in English, an undergraduate degree, and I have a master's degree in, believe it or not, meditation, the psychology of meditation. So I am both a mediator and a meditator. And the question of, what inspired me to write these books is that basically mediation and meditation are they're the same thing, they're just applied in a different way. So when we think about meditation, we're coming to stillness, we're quieting the mind, relaxing the mind, connecting to the breath, stabilizing the body, and connecting to our environment. So really becoming one with ourselves and our environment. When we work as a mediator, we're basically finding the disputing parties commonalities, their underlying interests, and bring them into oneness, you could say, or into agreement or into sameness. So I realized at a certain point it's the same activity. But after the years of being a mediator, I think I came to the courts as the director of dispute resolution in the early 90s, and I worked in Seattle at their dispute resolution center before that. And what I started to see was that there's just such a range of skill that a lot of people could do a better job of solving their own problems if they could regulate their own nervous system, if they were able to listen and reflect what they heard, if they could hold two perspectives kind of in equilibrium long enough to see how something creative could emerge. And so I wrote the books really after years and years of doing that work and thinking, well, maybe it would just be helpful to give people a jump start into developing a little bit more skills themselves.
So with that background, Diane, what do you think are the most important, whether you call them social or communication skills, that people bring to the workplace?
Well, I would say that, just one's willingness to grow is the first thing. We talk about growing culture, but all cultures that grow are based on individuals who are growing. So one thing that I always like to explore is an organization have an expectation that people will grow and develop? So a willingness to be open and to learn, I think, is really important. A kind of a self-relation where one is aware of one's own states, one has a sense of what their style is, they know where their weaknesses are. So there's a certain amount of self-knowledge that I think is an important skill. In terms of others, listening skills are golden. Really good listening skills are, they're sort of the number one communication skill. Expressing ourselves in a way that creates confidence, that people can trust, that they don't feel that they're going to kind of encounter something unexpected, so they're not protecting themselves, and that basically gets the message across. So, our communication skills, our expression skills are equally as important. And again, that relates to self-knowledge in the sense that if I'm a person who is, let's say, intense, and my intensity can sometimes, my passion tips into feeling angry, I want to know that about myself so that I can regulate that. So the expression skills really matter as well. And then I would say just an overall attitude of respect, of confidence in your team and in the people that you're working with, and a willingness to occasionally place the right challenge to someone. That's a pretty big basket I just named.
And so it may be obvious, but sometimes I think we might need to state the obvious as to how can those skills make a difference in the workplace?
I was just talking to your team about the fact that Google did recently, I think it was in the last 2 years, they did a research on their most highly effective work teams at Google. And what they found is that teams that created an atmosphere of safety, and what safety meant is that people were free to be themselves. They would communicate, they could take risks, they could sometimes fail, or they could sometimes end up in conflict and recover. Those teams were the most work satisfied and the most effective. And an important part of that is that there was an abundance of communication as well as spilling into conflict and then recovering. So that just generally creates more ease and more enjoyment and more of a sense of shared purpose in an organization. The difference between walking into a room that has that kind of working relationship versus walking into a room where people are tentative with each other, where they're not clear necessarily that they're on the same team, maybe there are rivalries or maybe their lack of confidence in one another. It's an absolutely different experience to work in an organization like that or a team.
So I think a lot of us are accustomed to learning certain skills, like we can learn how to use an Excel spreadsheet.
Sure.
Or we can learn how to use Outlook, or an engineer can learn certain math problems. And when we're hiring people, we may do testing or do certain things to try to understand if a person has the skill that's right for the job. For these skills, how do people practice these skills or go about learning them in the first place? Nav, could you talk to us a little bit about how you see those skills either demonstrated in the workplace Or when you're interviewing, how do you tell if people have those skills?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that Diane pointed out was listening skills, and then she pointed to the fact that in an interview, when a person's interviewing, he asks a question. The person who's listening, the interviewer, recites the question and asks a follow-up question. If I understand, is this what you meant? So, restating in other words and then asking for clarification would be a really great sign in an interview that somebody was listening, they were attentive, and that they're trying to make clear of what was asked of them. And that's one particular example. Another one that she talked about was being self-aware. So, for example, I really enjoy when somebody is really aware of their own emotional state and what triggers them, what makes them angry, what makes them emotional. And when they're really direct and honest about that, especially like, for example, when you describe certain aspects of your workforce. So, for example, if you describe that some of your meetings are highly contentious, where there's going to be people with differing views, and you ask them a question, how do you handle that? I asked a person this question, and I asked the question in particular, if your political ideologies were different than somebody else's political ideology, how would you react? And that person, ultimately stated that she would need to pause, take a break, and step out of the room because she wouldn't want to make a blunder mistake. And I just appreciated that honesty.
Okay, that's good. That's very helpful. Jacob, for somebody who's been out in the workforce looking for jobs, how do you go about letting people know you have some of these skill sets?
I think a lot like how Nav was saying is how when you're in this interview process or you're talking with someone, sometimes just repeating a little back what they said to show that you fully understood the question. I know when I've talked with a few people that there's actually one time someone complimented me on that and was like, I really know you were like listening instead of just going through the motions, because this is probably just a normal situation for you and you're just trying to be fast. And I thought that was kind of a cool remark to say, all right, they not only realized I was listening, but went the extra step, again, more communication, to say thank you for doing that.
Okay, great, thank you. So I understand we should be able to see Diane again. Diane, I think you're in the middle of telling us how you can develop and practice these skills. So if you want to pick that back up, that would be great.
Okay, sure. Just another study that maybe is worth sharing. There's a longitudinal study that Harvard has done. I think it's in their ed psych department on people's happiness. And what they discovered is that it started out as men's happiness, and then women were included partly along the way. So it's been a 75-year study. And basically, on the happiness, people who report much higher levels of happiness, they are, you could say, more emotionally mature. They developed emotionally, getting to what Nav was just talking about, and they had the communication skills to express their ideas and to listen to others well. That leads to reporting higher satisfaction and better relationships, and that turns to more altruism in the community. So that there's a very direct relationship between communication skills and altruism, and it runs right through relationships. So in terms of developing the skills, I think Jacob was just talking about the importance of learning how to reflect, how to listen, how to take in someone's message, how to repeat that message back, how to then ask any further clarifying questions, and then how to express oneself in a way that one can be heard. So I would say one way, of course, is just to find a good communication skills class online and to take it, or to find one in your organization and to take it. The other thing that makes a big difference, and in terms of the growth of culture, what we find is that when you hang out with people that have the skills you want, you're much more likely to learn them. So really identifying the people in your life that have the kind of communication skills that you would like to have, and spending time with them and paying attention to how they do it, and actually tuning in to that. So you can study, but you can also just learn through modeling and watching people.
People often talk about wanting to have mentors, and I think mentor relationships generally evolve naturally, but watching people around you who are doing what you think you want to do is one of the best ways to actually learn. And I remember when I was a brand new lawyer sitting in a bar commission meeting, and there was a person leading it who was very good. And the woman next to me said, "We should watch this, Charlotte, so that we know what to do when we're there." And but for her having that wherewithal, I don't know if I would have known to do that.
Wow.
So, it's the kind of thing you have to like tell yourself, hey, pay attention. I think that's excellent advice.
The other thing I would say, Charlotte, just on that, a quick point, is to realize that, you know, we grow these skills in relationship to others. These are not something you can learn on your own. You always have to do it in relationship. And one has to also be patient, because particularly in the domain where you're dealing with others, and others will often understand differently than what you intend. There's a difference between our intention and our impact, that a lot of it is learned through making mistakes and correcting.
Will you just talk for a little bit about the difference between intent and impact?
Yes. So there's a book called Difficult Conversations, again, that was written by some of the people in the Harvard Negotiation Project. That was a little bit like my books in terms of just trying to help people with some of the basic skills of communication and negotiation. And they're the ones that distinguish between intent and impact. So what they're trying to say is lots of times, you know, you can think about an ordinary situation with your spouse, you know, where you thought you had an agreement and they didn't realize it, and suddenly da 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 da. And so you say, you know, I'm a little upset by the fact that we didn't follow through on this thing we agreed. And then somebody will say, well, I didn't intend to make you feel bad. You know, you'll often, if you give someone feedback, the response is, I didn't intend it. Right? So we can start to pull apart intention from the impact of something. So even though someone didn't intend it, maybe you yourself didn't intend it, it still can have an impact. And so when we stop conflating that, it's helpful. So for example, and this is a little bit dicey, and it's something that people are working with a lot right now. But let's imagine that as a white woman, a person of color said that they experienced something I did as racist or as not sensitive to the reality of people of color. And my first response is like, well, I didn't mean to do that. I didn't intend that. But if I can separate intent from impact and realize my motive was a good motive, and there's still a chance that they're perceiving something I'm not. So the impact was there, even though I didn't mean it. And then it might be something like, I'm so glad you shared with me. Could you help me understand it better so I can kind of not make that error in the future? So that's a very good thing to disambiguate intent from impact.
Great, thank you. So as we talk about hiring people, and as we talk about developing a culture, I sometimes think it's important to make it clear we're not just looking for everyone to be just alike. And so sometimes I've heard people say the phrase, well, we want to make sure we hire somebody who fits in. And that phrase fits in always makes me a little nervous that we're looking for people who are just like whoever I am. So that would mean they would fit in, they would get the same jokes, or they would enjoy the same stuff. And I want to know if you can talk a little bit about how we can build a culture and identify a culture we want while also embracing differences.
So the deeper the bond, the greater the tolerance for diversity. The deeper the togetherness or the teamwork, the more room for the individual expression of difference. So you can always correlate, you know, the deep bond with the tolerance for more difference. The less safe we feel, the less we tolerate difference, and the more that we want people to be and act and think like we do. It's a very important hallmark in human development. And I should say that my work is grounded in a lot of adult development research, that there is a certain level of development for all of us. You could say the ethnocentric part of us, that we just feel more comfortable in people like us, because in our evolutionary history, we were more likely to be harmed or killed by someone who was different. So we're very sensitive to it. But then there's this very powerful leap where we move from what we call ethnocentric, where we want lots of conformity and sameness, to world-centric, where different stops being as threatening and different starts to be really energizing and enlivening. And so, teaching people, that the shared purpose of being in a company, the shared purpose of being on a team, the set of shared values creates a ground in which there's more space for our differences. And that's something a good leader can do and help people mature into.
Okay, thank you. So now that your organization, would you share with us the culture you aspire to have and how you go about hiring individuals who would help create that culture?
Yeah. So the culture that we try to facilitate is a culture of openness, a culture where people are competent, a culture where individuals are, they're likely to face individuals who are different than them. And one of the things that that Diane just discussed is, how close you are, how together you are. If you guys are closer, the more open you are to having new people, new ideas and thoughts. And so we have a diverse group of individuals. We have people from all walks of the world at Gillette Health, and we are very open to new ideas and thoughts as a result of that. But how we sort of create that culture is we hire individuals who, like I said, are competent. They seem knowledgeable, trustworthy, but also they're, in the interview process, they're open to hearing new ideas and thoughts. They're open to, they've worked in cultures that are diverse, and oftentimes they have an experience, multiple perspectives. So, for example, we have individuals, we like to search for individuals who've worked in multiple sectors, such as, healthcare, finance, the business sector. So they have, a wide realm of experience. And so, yeah, those are the things that we look for.
So Jacob, on the other side of that, I know you have a position that you've accepted and are going to, but when you were looking for positions, how did you determine if the place you were going to had the kind of culture you wanted to join?
Yeah, I think with this one, a lot of it is that firsthand experience. So when I was talking to this company, I was kind of trying to figure out who I knew that was around them. So who's been in that experience? Can you tell me firsthand of what is this culture like? I know a lot of companies, they have these big goals and they aim to say, we want to be super inclusive. We want to make sure everyone feels safe in these environments. But sometimes those goals are a little higher than what they are in actuality. So it was really good to talk to a few people, get their perspective and say, I actually feel like this company is meeting these goals and that we are striving to continue to make it even better.
Okay, thank you. So I want to turn to some of the questions that were submitted prior to today. And then I think people are also submitting questions while we're talking. And the first question, Diane, tell us what the question is stated. What is your strategy for holding space for team members who you fundamentally disagree with?
And it was around vaccinations. And I'll be holding a meditation retreat here in Southern Utah in August. And one of my main team members, there are about 6 of us who basically hold the retreat together, and everyone's vaccinated except 2 people, and they're a couple. And this person is very well read and believes in the science, and he basically weighs that the vaccination, that it hasn't been around long enough for him to feel comfortable taking it. So that was kind of the scenario. And I noticed when we started to talk about it, because we were trying to decide about what our protocols were going to be this summer for, and they're the only two people who'll be at the retreat of about 50 people who haven't been vaccinated. So we were discussing protocols, and I felt everybody's anxiety go up, like, because there was this sense that, where the pandemic is concerned, people's life and safety is at risk. Right. So people are nervous. And when we're talking with people who have a really different view than we do about vaccinations, that's like a life or death thing, so that's like we're super anxious. So I just said to everybody, here's the thing. What's important for us in this moment is to be able to talk about this in a way that we can lower our anxiety level. Because regardless of what the outcome is, if we can understand one another better and bring more cohesion to sort of our shared meaning, then we're going to be able to communicate that to the other people, and they're going to be put at ease that we're on the same page and we're coherent. So my number one goal for right now is not to come to an outcome, what are our protocols, but let's try to have the conversation and let's bring out all of our differences and see if we can hear all the differences in a way and still keep some quality of relaxation in the room. That's my number one goal. And when we get to that place, then we'll start thinking about outcomes. But right now, multiple perspectives and multiple truths, and let's work with our nervous system so that we can all feel like there's a place at the table for our view. So that's an example that I just recently did this last week.
That's a great example because it's really facing every organization and every group. So as you had the conversation then, did people go into their mode of trying to be advocates, or were they able to?
Yeah, they did. They did. Yeah. So we listened to the two people who are not getting vaccinated, who are a couple. And I thought that because I am vaccinated, so I was, even though I was leading the conversation, I also, had a position, right? So, but I was still kind of the person in charge of making sure that we could do this. And I felt like the people who'd been vaccinated did a relatively good job, even though I could feel the tension around their view. And then when it came time for the people who had been vaccinated to share their perspectives, the two people weren't listening very well. And they started to re-legitimize why they weren't getting vaccinated. So there was a moment where I had to say, okay, hold on. We're getting all the perspectives on the table. I think we've heard yours fully. So what would be great is if you could just listen and hear the other side. That would really be supportive. So I had to do that kind of correction for a minute. And I did have to say to one woman who started advocating in a rather dominating way, I did have to say, okay, so take a little off of it because you're advocating a little bit, so just get your perspective out. Let's create space for all of this, and then there's a little moment where you say, all of us have been through a lot. We're all doing risk analysis. We're all trying to take care of ourselves. We're trying to participate with community. We're trying to make decisions based on empiric evidence. Every single one of us is experiencing that. And we've come up with different conclusions. And we have to be able, so every so often there's a pep talk when you're the leader in the middle, right?
That is true. So just not to get too far off on the vaccination question, but
yeah, it's a big one.
Nav and Jacob, I would like to know how you've experienced those conversations, or if you have, either in the workplace or otherwise in any groups, about, do we make everybody get vaccinated, or what do we do? Do either one of you have any thoughts on that? Nav?
Yeah. So, my thoughts on, the vaccination situation was, as our organization, we had an open dialogue conversation about how everyone felt about, the vaccines, number one, and then also, so we had a huge Zoom meeting, and we essentially opened the conversation up. We discussed how everyone felt about the vaccinations, and we allowed everyone to make the decision for themselves. So for example, if they didn't feel comfortable taking the vaccine, then they wouldn't essentially be able to come into the office, but they would still be able to work remotely. And so, we gave them that opportunity. But we also did push, science articles. We did tell them to, adhere to the guidelines of the CDC, and, to look for the best, most credible research available. and we push that to each of our employees.
Okay.
But we ultimately allow them to make the decision for themselves.
So we've done the same thing internally, although we did a survey and over 90% of the people in our workplace have been vaccinated, which provides comfort to people who think that, vaccine is important. And so they feel more comfortable about being at work. If you're not vaccinated, you can still come to the office. We don't keep you from coming to the workplace. But we do ask that you wear a mask. And one of the things we shared with people is we have at least one employee who's not eligible to get the vaccine because it would make her very sick because of an underlying health condition. And so that we looked at it as that's all the more reason for all of us who can get it to help keep her well, not just ourselves well, but to try to broaden it to a sense of community. I'm not sure, Diane, we did it as well as you did your conversation. We might have been a little pushy and not as good of listeners.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take something from that and how I talk about it.
Yeah.
In the office.
Yeah.
I think that's
well, building again, building the sameness, building the fact that we've been through a pandemic, that we care about one another's health, that we're looking at empiric evidence, that we're all doing our own risk analysis. When you build commonality, as I said before, there's more room for the differences. So there's more space for the differences. And
so Jacob, when you've applied for jobs or talked to potential employers, have anybody talked about vaccinations with you?
So with my experience, that was actually never brought up. Okay. Everyone just kind of put the blanket statement of we'll start remote and we'll kind of cross that bridge when we get to it.
Okay. So do you have any nervousness about being in the workplace?
There's a little bit of not quite sure what to expect. But I think a lot of it is, taking control of what I can with myself. So if I feel comfortable with the vaccine, get the vaccine. And if I'm not feeling well, make sure to wear a mask. And if I do feel comfortable, don't wear a mask. I think it's really just kind of precautions can I take with myself and then kind of go from there.
Okay. So I wanted to go back to a little bit about the whole idea of during an interview being able to exhibit these skills of communication and social skills that we think are so important to make an organization work. One of the things that I've learned in terms of interviewing people and then selecting a candidate is I always call references. And just recently, it has hit me in a very stark way as to how some references are so much more helpful than other references. And so when I have a person who's talking to me about a potential candidate, be able to give me examples of how a person listens, or tell a story about problem solving, or tell a story about how the person is able to be collaborative, not just say, yeah, they're very collaborative, and that's it. And, they're a team player, but to then give me a very, tangible evidence of that and a story they tell, it has made a difference in who we choose to hire. And so I've started telling people that when you ask somebody to be a reference for you, help them and give them a story that they can tell, or ask them if they know a story about you, so that then when somebody is calling and talking about you, they actually can advocate for you in a way that shows that you have those communication and social skills. I would just be curious, both Jacob and Nav, if you've, how you deal with that in terms of either selecting people to be references or in talking to references.
Yeah, I think same with you, Charlotte. I feel like references are always one of the best methods of, determining if a candidate is going to be successful or not. And I'm like you, Charlotte. I probe. I ask a lot of questions to references, and I ask about, obviously, what are some of the good qualities, but also what are some of the bad qualities. And I really try to establish some sort of like connection with the individual I'm trying to attain that information from. try to be friendly and kind, just so that they can be a bit more open and welcoming. And I will say, yeah, I think that is very. I also think, when I have been applying for jobs as well, I think what's been really helpful is having, open and honest conversations with the individuals that you are going to utilize as a reference. Just let them know, hey, I would like for you to be a reference. Is that okay? First off, ask if it's okay. And then, sort of discuss with them, what they're going to say. So essentially, it's just that thought itself, which is going to help that reference be more prepared and more thoughtful, and sort of more alert when they do receive that call.
And do you encourage managers to call people as references?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we don't, at Gillette Health, we want at least 3 references, and we call every one of them. And if we can't reach one, we want to get another one. And so very adamant about that, because I think even, when you hear, and I think this is from the hiring standpoint, when you hear it's not even about what a person says, it's how they say it. You can determine so much. I mean, if somebody says, oh, they were a great worker, but it's a flat, I mean, it kind of tells you that it's a favor, versus, if their tone of voice is actually, they go in depth about, like you said, a particular example, and their tone is passionate and engaging, and they actually seem helpful. That just shows the dynamic at, between this person and his former boss. And it gives you a much clearer picture. So I really tend to focus on how people are saying things versus what they're actually saying.
Okay. I know that in the HR world, a lot of people believe, nobody's giving references anymore. But I will tell you, I have always been able to get somebody to talk about an employee they worked with. I've never just not been successful at that. And so I encourage people to pursue it. But one question I always ask a current manager is what advice they would give a new manager so that the employee can be their best self in the new job. And people love to answer that because they love to be helpful. And they don't really feel like they're talking about the person as much as they're talking about an idea. But I've actually learned far more about employees with the answer to that question than any other questions. But I've also learned I have to be careful about too much judgment, because some references have much better language skills than others. And I might still be able to get information, but I have to keep approaching it differently. And Diane, I would ask your thoughts about that.
Mm-hmm. I just want to apologize for my connectivity issue today. How is it now? Is it any better? Is it okay? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're getting at, Charlotte, and I think it's important because, the job, the purpose of the job, the context, the ability to bond and to be a good team player all contribute to an employee and to an organization having a good experience. Having said that, we know there are multiple intelligences. We know that people have real strengths along a physical or a kinesthetic line, and maybe their verbal skills aren't so great. Or maybe they're really good at strategy and tactics, right? But they're not so good at giving other people a feeling of warm, fuzzy feeling on the team, So I think the question that you're kind of asking is, how do we deal with differences in type? And so it seems to me that to kind of look at what the function of the job is just from an objective perspective, and to see that, look at that skill set, and then to look at the skill set of what we call the soft skills or the interpersonal skills or social skills, and how someone is going to be able to show up and express themselves and listen and demonstrate that they can empathize and participate in a team. We sort of have to have both of those on the table, like the technical expertise versus the ability to really be a team player.
Good, thank you. So another question we've received from people in the audience is, how do you speak success with those who are above you in management when your ideas differ from theirs, or you feel unheard when you make suggestions?
Are you
What would
asking
you
me?
say?
Are you
Yes,
asking?
Diane,
I was
I'm
hoping, I was
asking
hoping you were asking someone else that question, Charlotte.
you. I am asking you.
Okay. Well,
Start us off anyway.
I was saying this a little bit earlier, but I think it's a very important point, because where there are differences in status, power, and influence, there are differences in how we communicate. So whenever we're communicating with someone who has more power than we do in the organization, we have to come to that conversation more willing to receive, more willing to adapt, but that doesn't take away the need for us to also be understood. And I think sometimes asking a couple of questions can really be helpful. Like, are you open to hearing a couple of different ideas that I have? You know, lots of times people will start talking and expect and want to be received without actually preparing the person. And if a person is in a more of a leadership role and they're used to executing, they're used to telling people what to do, sometimes they're just simply not in the habit of listening. So you can say, are you open to my idea? You can also say, I understand that you hold the big picture here and that I'm in a more specific role, or that you're in leadership and all the responsibility really comes back to you. But I think there's a way that I could really be helpful here. You know, so the mistake I think many of us make is that we want to flatten the difference, the power difference, when in fact we need to honor it and work with it, because it is a feature of the relationship, and we need to be conscious and respectful and even support the difference while asking for what it is that we need. I noticed that I have that challenge with mediators. Mediators often come into spaces where there are power differences, a boss is in the room, and they attempt to flatten that. And I always have to train them out of that habit, because in fact, a leader does have more power. They also have more responsibility. So what is it that you can bring? Can you open the conversation and ask someone to hear you, would be my fundamental response.
Well, and as a leader, if I think about somebody asking me that question at the beginning, that would so help get me in the right mindset.
Exactly.
To listen better.
Exactly.
And then I would feel committed, you know, because I have to answer the question. Of course, I'm going to answer, yes, I am interested in listening. And I think it would make me listen better if somebody asked me that question. Although I probably shouldn't need it, it would be very helpful, I think.
And if you're working for someone who literally isn't capable of hearing your ideas, if sometimes taking your ideas, of affirming your creativity, and just simply not respecting you as an employee, I would ask why you're working there. And is there a way to work for someone else? Seriously.
Because the culture fit goes both ways.
It does, absolutely.
Not only does the organization decide if this person will fit in their culture, but the individual has to make choices about what kind of place do I want to work. Now, I say that also knowing there's a practical need to pay your rent.
Totally.
Your mortgage and all of that. And so you have to balance those things. And Nav, you look like you had something to add here.
Yeah, no, I think, you know, to answer this question, I've had, you know, one of my greatest sort of abilities, I think, was being heard in meetings. And I think a lot of that has to do with, you know, for example, if you don't have a good relationship with your boss or superior, find out things about them, find out what their interests are, understand, you know, what they like. I mean, I had a boss in business services at the University of Utah Hospital who genuinely did not like me. And I, you know, took the time to understand his interests. I started to talk about golf. I didn't even like golf. I started to learn about golf, and, you know, finally just that, you know, conversation about sports opened up a conversation to something else. And this individual just happened to be really private. And, you know, before I took an interest in this person's interest, I never was heard in a meeting. My ideas were always, you know, obliterated. I was always kind of put to the side. And I think what really, you know, I would tell somebody like Jacob or, you know, a student is find out what your superiors like, find out what their interests are, take an interest in the things that, you know, they find interesting. And it allows you to establish a better relationship with them. And then, you know, once you establish a better relationship with them, if, you know, everyone starts to realize that you have a decent relationship with the boss, they're going to treat you, not only are your employees going to treat you better, but your boss himself is going to treat you better. And in meetings, you're going to be more likely to be heard. So, I mean, you know, as cliche as that is, get to know your boss and be really close to your boss.
So it makes me think of this idea that Brian Stevenson talks about very much in his book, Just Mercy, and that's the idea of proximity. And the more proximate, the more closer you are around a person, the more you start to understand their perspective. And years ago, before ever I heard the name put to it by Brian Stevenson, I was in a corporation where I just didn't have a great relationship with this colleague executive. And it seemed like whenever we were in a meeting, there was a tension, an anxiety rise. And no matter what the other one said, the other one immediately disagreed. And I practiced this thing where every day I made myself go in his office and sit down and talk for at least 5 minutes about anything, whether it was our kids or what we did. And that experiment worked. Like over time, just being in the same space and having a conversation, no matter what it was about, reduced all of the anxiety at some point. And it's not always possible to do that, but I think the idea of figuring out how to find some proximity is good. That's why I tell people, quit sending emails, go walk down the hall and walk in the office, or in these days, pick up the phone and call, hear the voice. Even if you're not in the same physical space, don't send an email, pick up the phone and call a person, no matter what level or what the conversation's about. Because the tone of emails is undecipherable and we often do it wrong. But I just think that's a really, I agree with you, Nav and Diane, of how that would work. There's several questions here, but let me, I guess here's a real just, Diane, kind of, maybe you have some advice here or not. Is there a guide, a useful guide for in-person and written communication of how to be more concise, efficient, and clearly understood? Or anybody who has a guide they would recommend, chirp in here.
You mean like a book?
I think, I mean, I'm reading the question and I'm guessing that's what they mean is like, yeah, a useful guide.
I think my books are really good.
I do too.
There's a third one too. So yes. This one, Everything is Workable, is really kind of basic communication and conflict skills. This book was written because my publisher it's called The Zen of You and Me. It wanted me to explore the topic of difference, right? So I explored the topic of difference, how we do what you've been asking about difference. And then the third one, Compassionate Conversation, leads into much more conversations about deeper differences around culture, race, gender, those kinds of things. So I co-wrote it with two of my colleagues, one of whom is Asian and from Britain, and the other who is African-American and also Brazilian. So all three of those, I think, have good chapters on what we're talking about.
And what I really liked about, especially the Everything is Workable book, is at the end, there are things to do to practice the skill that's discussed.
Yes, that's right.
You can practice this. Mm-hmm. It's not just something that you're born with or not born with, or you learn from your parents. It's something you can actively practice, is how to communicate. And I think your practice sessions at the end of each chapter are simple and easy, but yet really make you think. So I too would recommend those. Let's do one more question that we have time for. How has your industry, whatever you might call that, changed or evolved while you've been in your career? And Diane, I'll let you go first.
Well, I think I've changed and evolved maybe more than my industry, although things are certainly changing right now in the sense that I did so much work as a mediator and conflict resolution professional. And then through some teaching work, I ended up in the last 20 years doing a lot of transformational work. So much more training and much more helping people grow in the ways that people want to grow. Because one of the things that's built into who we are is we love to learn. And one of the things that we love to learn is how to be a fuller, more relaxed, more confident, and satisfied person. So I moved from conflict into helping people grow themselves. So I would say probably just the fact that we're all becoming much more world-centric, We really need to develop the skills of understanding cultures that are different than our own, whatever those happen to be. We have to understand that there's a long history of abuse that we need to somehow reconcile ourselves to. And then we also need to develop a lot of interest in those who are unlike us. I liked what Nav said, and you said, Charlotte, about simply taking an interest in your boss and taking an interest in people who are different than you are. That seems to be the huge developmental task around the globe right now, besides, our more difficult global problems, is just how do we, as such an incredibly diverse planet, really learn to get along and love each other?
Nav, do you have any comments about the changes you've seen in organization or any industry?
Yeah, there's quite a bit. So I would say, within the nonprofit sector, I've seen a lot more individuals at the supervisor, managerial level, and director level, and even CEO level and executive director that are more diverse now. And I think that's a positive sign. I think we're moving in a more progressive direction. I think what's important is that a lot of nonprofits are really taking and listening to problems that are existing within societies and trying to formulate effective solutions to help better their cultures, to help make them more inclusive, and to help make them more, transparent. And so I think that's really in the nonprofit sector. I think in the finance sector in particular, I think one of the biggest changes is, technology. So because, the tech sector has always been so advanced, but I think now in the financial sector, there's been huge changes with the incorporation of new technology. And it's really interesting because you have a lot of smart people who are, by the book, they like repetition. They like, they like doing what they know. It's a very interesting in the financial sector, because I think one of the biggest challenges is seeing how this is posing a lot of challenges to, associates, VPs, directors, and you're really starting to see, superstars emerge that can sort of, the superstars are the ones that are able to take this new technology, incorporate it, and be successful with it, whereas others not so much. But I think those are ones that come to mind myself.
Okay. In terms of, I just would add my observations here. In terms of the legal profession, I would say, I practiced law, I don't know, I think over 30 years now, but I would say when I first started practicing law, it was the lawyer who was the holder of all knowledge. And in fact, it was the very beginning of when we had such things as paralegals. And I would say that profession has learned, we lawyers have learned, that there are people who are experts in lots of other things, that we can honor their expertise and they honor ours in a way that makes us all more effective, whether it's a paralegal or a social worker or an investigator or any number of professions where we're working together on a problem. And I think that's really changed over the years. And I think people who want to be relevant and effective in any profession need to recognize that and start honoring other people's expertise, so that there is not one particular profession or degree that makes you the holder of all the best knowledge. I think the other thing I've learned a lot, I've always said that curiosity is the most important thing a person can bring to work, that a curious person can excel and succeed. But I've also learned the idea of technology is not necessarily generation or age-based. And I think the pandemic taught me that a lot, is that new technology is also about change. And some people can handle change and some people really struggle with it. And it has nothing to do with age, because I've worked with some people in their 30s and 40s who cannot adapt to some new technology system. And I always say, and I have an aunt who is 101 who plays Scrabble online on her iPhone. So that age part isn't necessarily the challenge. It's the idea of not being afraid to try something and to push buttons and to see what happens. And the more we can help people have safe space to do that, I think the more everybody will be more engaged in the workplace, from my own perspective, in terms of answering that question. So it's 12:55. I want to go ahead and wind up a little bit. But I do want everybody to have any last thoughts they want to share, and maybe touch on the idea, because this was also a question. What do you think the most important thing is to say or to do to help people feel comfortable coming back to the live workplace? And Jacob, let's start with you.
Yeah, one thing I think we can really do to help people feel comfortable is accepting if they want to be vaccinated or not, or if they want to wear a mask. Just be inclusive, let them take care of themselves and you take care of yourselves. I think the more you're accepting of other people's decisions can help them feel more comfortable to make that change and start to come back.
Okay, thank you. Nav?
Yeah, I think, having the conversation that Jacob mentioned, but then also, understanding obviously what their preference is, but also telling them, regardless of what they choose, that you support them because they're, your employee and you care about them and you want them to succeed, regardless of their decision. I think that's one of the most important things. But also, I think being really cognizant of the fact that these are major changes, and you can't expect, somebody to just go from working at home and having a particular work-life balance in that particular realm and then coming back and just working full time. So, I think having open and honest conversations about, maybe a dual model, and how comfortable, asking your employee how comfortable they are, with coming back to work, and potentially, weaning them back into that environment, because these are major transitions and you want to be really cognizant of, obviously, the success of your organization, but also the mental health, which obviously both of those things correlate. And I also think that by just having those conversations and, being open, it shows to your workers that you do care about their well-being and that you want them to succeed, and that you're willing to listen to them. And so, I was talking to my friend at the health department, and she was saying that one of the models that they're utilizing is, a dual model. They're allowing people to come in 2 days per week and then, work from home 3 days a week, and then slowly but surely weaning them back into the office. But from the conversation I had with her, she said it was really helpful because they took in consideration, that there were major changes, and, she had felt heard, and she also had felt like she would be able to perform best with this particular setup. And so
I will add, one of the things we're doing is having small group gatherings with food, and people love to have food. And so that really helps the casualness of it, the interaction, and for people just to show up. So I'm going to let Diane have the last word, but before I do that, I need to let you know that all of you who have signed up and who are listening will receive an email with a link with a recording. So Diane, why don't you share with us any final thoughts that you have for us? And you're muted, I think.
I just want to underscore what we've been saying, which is to grow and evolve a culture requires us to support the growth and the evolution of the individuals in that culture. And I think one thing that managers and leaders can do is they can actually set up almost like a developmental expectation that you're a developmental organization that's growth oriented, so that when people come in and are hired, you can actually build in this sense that we're all here to grow and change, particularly where it comes to our communication skills and our relationship building. So I think building the expectation that we're all in a process of growing our skills and are becoming more deeply comfortable with who we are.
Great, thank you. And thank you again, Jacob, Nav, and Diane for this discussion. And thank you for all of those who joined us today. Have a good rest of the day. Take care.